Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Untold Radio. Tonight we have Charles Lear on. Charles Lear is the author of The Flying Saucer Investigators. It is a book about history. It is also about the people involved in the mystery of flying saucers. It is about the investigators, but also the witnesses. The period covered is called the Golden Age of Flying Saucers. Welcome aboard, Charles. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Alex. Pleasure to be here.
So, Charles, first thing you told me, you have not seen a UFO. It's it's amazing for somebody to be inspired to write a book. Inspired to, obviously, it sounded like you've been doing a lot of blogging also on the topic, which is great. How long have you been doing this stuff?
4 years I've been doing the blogging.
Oh, wow. Okay. And when did you get inspired enough to want to write a book? I mean, that's a huge undertaking.
Well, I've been writing a blog once a week, almost nonstop, maybe one or two dropouts or three or four. I need a break. But yeah, once a week for Martin Willis over at Podcast UFO. And Martin one day said, "Hey, Charles, you've written quite a hell of a lot of blogs. You've got so much material. You should put it together in a book."
Oh.
And I had actually already started writing a book. I was writing this book, essentially, just kind of toying around with it. And I'd gotten it started, and I said, "You know what? I've got something already started." And he goes, "Well, Martin had brought Calvin Parker to Philip Mantle, who runs Flying Disc Press."
Yeah, Calvin Parker is the Pascagoula incident situation.
Right. So Charles Hickson went on the lecture circuit, and Calvin Parker just disappeared. He didn't want anything to do with it. And he actually told everybody that he was asleep for the entire thing, which turned out not to be true, according to him. So, the blogger before me wrote something about Pascagoula, and this guy writes in, "I was very impressed by your article. It was very well, your blog. It was very well done, Calvin." And Martin responded saying, "Is this the Calvin? This wouldn't be Calvin Parker, would it?" And it turned out to be Calvin Parker. So he got him in touch with my neighbor's dog. He got him in touch with Philip Mantle. Calvin wrote the book. A great story, by the way. Calvin told Philip Mantle he could publish a book only if he didn't edit it. And then he locked himself. He wrote this book in 2 weeks. He locked himself in a room and just wrote for 2 weeks straight.
Well, Calvin is
the book's like that thick.
Calvin's a no BS guy. I mean, I don't know how anybody could not believe his story.
Yeah, he was very popular on the circuit.
Just so matter of fact, that guy. And it's probably one of the creepier cases when he described that finger going down his throat.
Yeah.
Alien. It's just, oh my God, that's enough to freak anybody out, just horrid. So you named your book The Flying Saucer Investigators. And that name, Flying Saucer, obviously is old. We'll get into that. But I remember the first time I heard that name, Flying Saucer. I remember the exact day. I can remember the whole day. I was in kindergarten, 5 years old, right? And our kindergarten teacher, read a newspaper article to us little kids about some flying saucer landing and the aliens. And we're all sitting there, these kids, and we're just petrified, And then she was like, after she got done with the story, she was okay, now for a nap. And we had to pull our little scratchy rugs out.
Right.
Sleeping in kindergarten. And we're all laying. I remember that. Every kid was laying there with his eyes wide open, staring at the window.
Oh.
Freaked out. So ever since then, it sparked an interest in me. Game alone.
How was the PTA meeting after that?
Yeah, I got it. Those were the days, if that would have happened today, the parents would have all complained. Back in those days, anything they wanted, nothing ever. There was never any repercussions.
Right on.
But the name flying saucer is obviously old. It's almost outdated now. Even UFO is outdated. It's now UAP.
No, it's
So
not.
why did you pick
No,
the name?
here's my answer to that.
It's classic.
Try and put ology after UAP. It doesn't work.
Exactly.
You know, right? What are we all?
UAP.
What do we all do? Are we apologists?
UAPology? Yeah.
You apologists. See
Oh.
what that? Oh, that doesn't work, does it? No, it's all a government plot to make us apologists.
I know.
That's funny.
But yeah, and actually in the book, different names come up. Kroll and Jim Lorenzen, who started the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO. There you go, aerial phenomena, right there. So Kroll Lorenzen basically didn't want it associated with UFOs because of the connotations of that. So she called them aerial phenomena. She didn't go UAP quite, but pretty close. But Stanton Friedman stuck to flying saucers for pretty much his whole lecture.
He did. Yep.
And you know, so I rose by any other name, but I like flying saucers and everything that comes along with it. And I don't apologize for it either. But I don't have to because I write about history. So
Well, I think flying saucers is the name that gets attention.
yeah, and it's fun.
Yeah, it is a fun name.
Yeah.
Of course, for those that had, obviously, I'd be amiss if I didn't ask you how the name flying saucers was coined.
Yeah, this story actually, when I was researching it, this story usually gets told wrong. Everybody attributes it to reporter Bill Paquette, and he interviewed Arnold, one of the first reporters to interview Arnold, and Arnold described them as moving as if you skipped a saucer across water, and that's what Bill Paquette wrote. The word flying saucers didn't show up until the Chicago Sun-Times in 1947. Supersonic flying saucers, I think, was the headline there. So that's the first place I saw it in my research, was in the Chicago Sun-Times. So Bill Paquette was the guy that reported Arnold saying that, but I think the term was first coined in the Chicago Sun-Times.
Interesting, and it kind of took off from there.
Yeah. Well, they were flying discs in the press for most of 1947, even after the flying saucers thing. So they were calling them flying discs. And what was really funny is it didn't matter what shape it was a flying disc. People were bringing the last blog I wrote, actually. People were bringing these like 5-pointed, 6-pointed radar targets that look like 6-pointed stars, and you know, that they were calling those flying discs. It didn't matter if it looked like a disc; it was a disc, which also plays into the Roswell story. There was nothing disc-like about the material Mac Brazel recovered at Roswell, but they called it the Army recovered a disc, and it didn't matter that it wasn't a disc, and that's the way the press was looking at it. So.
What shape do you think the Roswell craft was in? What shape?
You read the July 5th Roswell Daily Record, I think it is, and Mac Brazel describes it. It's like the day after. I think it's the July 8th. I have it over here, but I'm not going to reach over now. But it's the article the day after the Roswell Daily Record reported on the Army, Air Forces recovers flying disc. It's the day after. Mac Brazel describes what he recovered, and if you read that, he says it was a bundle, that was about that big, involving rubber, foil, sticks, and tape and this is back then in 1947, tape with little flowers on it, little purple flowers. So that's how Brazel described it. And, people argue that he was pressured to say that, but it's the day after. The story is that they sweated him for a week, and the day after, they announced it, he came out in the press say, this is what I found. So I think that's really informative. I don't want to dump on Roswell, but that
Right.
came and went. And I actually don't write about it in the book, but the only reason is because the flying and saucer investigators, the private investigators, didn't really get started until 1951. They were kind of loosely clubs started by kids mostly, and young adults, and they were more clubs than anything else. And then in 1951, the first serious organizations really got started, and Roswell had come and gone by then, and none of them dealt with it at all. So that's why it doesn't show up in the book. So
Interesting. Kenneth Arnold. Did you write about him in your book?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. He was the first privately funded flying saucer investigator.
Yeah.
He,
But I've got a question that very few know about, because I didn't even know about it. Somebody had told me that later in his life, towards the end of his investigations, he had concluded a lot of UFOs were maybe biological.
yeah, he did. There was another researcher, I forget his name at the moment, but he was taking infrared photos and getting these amorphous shapes. And yeah, this one researcher was convinced that that at least part of the explanation was that there were these creatures flying around in the sky, these organic creatures. So yeah, I could see Arnold coming to that
Yeah,
conclusion.
it's an interesting concept, only because if you think about it, from the ground to 300 miles up, we don't know anything. It's like probably the biggest environment that's been unexplored in a lot of ways. We really don't know what's up. And I've seen some things too that I'm like, those look alive. It doesn't look like something that's, nuts and bolts.
Mhm.
So I would imagine maybe the whole flying saucer, or the sightings that people see, that it's probably both. I'm sure there's nuts and bolts type
Mhm.
craft, and there's certainly likely, based on what I've seen, that there's some weird.
Yeah,
Weird.
I think the best answer is all of the above.
Yeah, exactly. So how far back do you go in your book? I mean, do you go back and you cover the world, or is it just in the
I just start with 1947. It goes from 1947, Kenneth Arnold sighting, which is pretty much marks the birth of the modern flying saucer / UFO era, up until 1969, when Project Blue Book was terminated.
Right.
And yeah, so that, I mean, there are, if you probably the earliest really credible UFO report in America was I think in the 1600s. There's Winthrop's Journal. John Winthrop was the governor of Massachusetts Bay, which ultimately became Massachusetts. And in his journal, he writes about these guys. They're in a boat on a river. They see something strange light. They said it moved like a hog. That was their frame of reference back then. Trot, move, kind of shaped like and moved like a hog, is how they described it. But the weirdest thing is in his journal, he says they found themselves. They had traveled, they thought, about a mile, and then they found themselves on the river back where they started. So that's a weird one, and it reads like a modern UFO tale. So yeah, Winthrop's Journal, if you can find that, it's right near the very end of the journal. So that it goes back in America at least that far as like a report by a very credible source in his journal.
Interesting.
Yeah, but for this is just for the purposes of my book, I just stuck to 1947 and 1969.
And you go up to present day.
Hmm?
You go right up
No,
to present day.
no. '69. That
Oh, okay.
Termination of Blue Book, and the characters were just awesome. They were really cool people. And the other cool thing about it is that they really thought that the answer was right around the corner. And here we are 75 years later, and we don't have any definitive answers. But they thought they were going to meet the aliens. They're getting close. Like first it was just craft, and then the humanoids started coming up. 1954, I read about. In France, there was a humanoid wave where people were seeing little hairy. It's called French hairy dwarves and whatsits. And that's what they were reporting. They're all little guys mostly. Everything from diver suits to creatures in diver suits to hairy little dwarves, and they just filled the French papers with them. And at the time, a French researcher named Aimé Michel, this is 1954, he had written a book, and because his book was popular, he was the go-to guy. So he was the French UFO expert at the time. And a young Jacques Vallée contacted Aimé Michel. In case your listeners don't know, Jacques Vallée was the model for Claude Lacombe in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And Jacques Vallée became interested at the time. He contacted Aimé Michel and complimented him on his work, because Aimé Michel really approached it from a scientific point of view. He had a theory called orthotony. It's also known, he wrote a book that was published in America as The Straight Line Mystery. And his idea was that he thought from the data he was able to collect and analyze, he saw these sightings going in these straight lines, as if it was a methodical survey in a grid pattern. And then towards the end of a flap, there would be scattered sightings. And his conclusion was that, they were doing this methodical kind of grid-like survey, and then going back and surveying areas of specific interest, which is why the pattern would appear random later. So it was a very interesting scientific approach, even as early as 1954. And then afterwards, Vallée stuck with it. And what's really interesting is Vallée came to the conclusion around the 1980s that we weren't going to find an answer, and he, got in the idea of the what people now call the interdimensional idea, or also with Vallée, it was the idea that this had a lot to do with fairy lore, that maybe what people were reporting as fairies and in other similar type entities in all kinds of various cultures was actually something to do with the UFO mystery. Especially the creatures. The creatures are all mostly diminutive, mostly 3 to 4 feet tall. So Vallée got that idea, but Vallée started thinking, maybe we're never going to find an answer. And Aimé Michel just couldn't live with that, so he got out of the biz around in the 1980s.
So when was the first time gray aliens have been reported, what we know as the modern gray aliens?
First time, I think probably the late 70s.
So that wasn't until much later.
But we still have humanoids. We still have all kinds of critters. They're still showing up. They're not, it's interesting that my take on the whole gray alien thing is that it gave everybody something to grab onto that made sense. Okay, we've identified the creatures. They're doing genetic experiments on us and developing a hybrid race because they can't procreate create. So this was something that made sense, which people grabbed onto, and I think researchers, it got kind of a confirmational bias to where information that would come in that would support this, they wrote about and reported. Information that deviated from this, they rejected and didn't write about. So in the meantime, if you look in the records, there are still reports of hairy little dwarves and all these other weird creatures that don't fit the model at all. Still going on. They're still coming in today.
Do you think? I mean, do you believe personally that all these strange creatures are really being seen, or are you skeptical?
I'm going to quiet my roommates down. Give me a second.
Yeah.
Absolutely, no problem.
One of the most interesting aspects of the whole UFO phenomena are the humanoids, to me.
Humanoids.
Yeah, because if you ever want to read a real interesting report, everybody, try to find the Humanoid Report online.
Okay, so I've there was a report in Florida. This made the Florida newspapers. Okay. This is 2019. This woman claimed to have seen a creature. She said it had a weird shaped head, specifically described its jaw. She said its jaw compared to a human jaw was like comparing a pit bull's jaw to a chihuahua. She said she saw this creature climb an invisible ladder, pull itself up into an invisible craft, and as it went up into the invisible craft, it disappeared from the top of its. It disappeared as it was going in. That's 2019. There was a report in I think 2020 in New Mexico when I was out in New Mexico for a year and a half. I'm living in Queens, so you can imagine why. These two hunters were in the mountains in West New Mexico, and they saw what looked like sort of a huge, maybe tent-like structure. They described it as having like this one main big structure and then a long thin structure, kind of like they described it as looking maybe like an archery range. And they went down a dip, and then when they came up over the dip, this thing was gone. And they were both in the movie industry, and they thought that their first impression was that when they saw it was that maybe this was some set for a movie. But when they came up, this huge thing was gone. And then one of them said, when he was out in the bush looking for elk, he saw a creature dressed in, I think it was yellow and black uniform, looking very strange. And we went to look further, and then this thing was gone. So these reports are still coming up. As far as the grays go, there are a lot of people playing around now with a ayahuasca, which the active ingredient in that is DMT. And a lot of people are describing seeing grays during DMT experiences.
That's interesting. Yeah.
A little owl.
Yeah. So, in terms of looking at these things as aliens, there are thoughts that this has something more to do with what shaman experience.
More of an archetype.
What was
They're
it,
more
Alex?
an archetype.
More like an archetype?
Yeah. Yeah. Like the conscious.
Yeah, essentially. But yeah, it just seems like it's a lot more complex than some creatures from Zeta Reticuli coming down and doing genetic experiments on us. That's actually sort of
Charles.
Yes.
So when you say that all, because there's all these different reports and they're reporting different things. You feel like these people are seeing different things, that they're not describing the same thing a different way. Because some of the things you're saying, they are way different than like the popular gray alien, right?
Yeah, but if you look at the literature and you look at the newspaper reports, there's a different story than what people are saying at lectures. I mean, less nowadays, but all this stuff is like late '90s, and um, a lot of people have moved on far beyond that.
Have you read the Humanoid Report?
Oh yeah,
It's insane what's in there. It's just
yeah. You're talking about Albert Rosales,
yes,
right?
yes.
Yes, Albert Rosales, and um, that's an interesting thing. In the book, a big division between there was. I call them my guardrails. There was the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, and the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena was headed up by Donald E. Kehoe, who wrote the first flying saucer book, Flying Saucers Are Real. I think he published that. He published an article in 1950. I think the book was published in 1950 as well. The article was in True Magazine. And he got on board. He wasn't the original founder of NICAP. That was T. Townsend Brown was the first director, one of the founders. And T. Townsend Brown claimed to have invented an anti-gravity device. And he was ousted because the board thought, well, one of the rumors is that the board thought that he was siphoning money from NICAP to fund his anti-gravity research. So they booted him and then put Donald Kehoe in. APRO was Jim and Coral Lorenzen, really started by Coral, his wife. And she had health problems here and again, and he would take over as director. In any case, both organizations approached the phenomena with a scientific rigor, reasonable scientific rigor. And the big division between them was that Kehoe would not deal with humanoids. He would only deal with the saucers because he thought the humanoids took away from the credibility of the reports, and that the public in general wouldn't take it seriously. Meanwhile, those at APRO, Jim and Coral, felt that, well, if you're going to investigate the idea that these are craft being piloted by creatures from other planets or other solar systems or other galaxies, even, you should probably deal with the people who might be flying them as well.
Yeah.
So they were open to humanoid reports, and Kehoe got into a lot of trouble with his membership because of this, because NICAP had a publication called the UFO Investigator, and APRO had a publication called the APRO Bulletin, and so I those two publications you can find online. You can find NICAP, the UFO Investigator. NICAP.org still has an active site maintained by Fran Ridge, even though NICAP just tanked after Project Blue Book folded. They kind of died a slow death, but it's still maintained by Fran Ridge, who was a MUFON member. And the APRO files can be found at the Archives for the Unexplained, among other sites. I think Open Minds. It wasn't working the last time I looked, but it might still be. But openminds.tv, but you also got it at the Archives for the Unexplained, and you can find that. This is a secret for your listeners because they don't make it easy. They digitized a lot of material, but they don't make it easy to find. Files, FILES, all small letters, .afu.se. Type that in, and you've got your keys to the mother lode. They've got an awesome amount of publications. Yeah, I'm actually a friend of David Marler's, who has extensive archives. He's got all of the Center for UFO Studies, Ellen Hynek's group. He's got all their files. He's got all the NICAP files, and he's got a lot of Project Blue Book files, and other people are giving him their archives to be a steward of. He's donating everything ultimately to the University of New Mexico. But in any case, he calls that's where I was going with that. He calls the people who run the archives for the unexplained. This is a massive physical archive in Sweden. And he calls them the Vikings because they come over here and raid our American archives and drag them back to Sweden. But you can get digital access to a lot of the stuff they got using files.afu.se. So in any case,
well, I want to know.
I'm sorry.
I want to jump into a new subject here.
Sure.
What pet peeves do you have with modern researchers versus the ones from the 60s? Because obviously, you're living in this era. So there's got to be some pet peeves. Obviously, let me rephrase what they were with the older researchers, that they would ignore data because it didn't fit with what they thought, or that it would take away the credibility. But what's happening nowadays that maybe irks you? Anything?
Oh, I wouldn't say I have any pet peeves. They're all contributing to the history. I like looking at it as an historian.
Yeah.
I laugh at a lot of what's going on. I think it's really funny that the Navy has gotten saddled with the whole thing and has to get up and testify before Congress. Meanwhile, the Air Force is probably sitting back and, especially the old timers are probably sitting back and laughing at them for stepping in it. Because the Air Force spent, about $600,000 to get the hell out of this business because it was a PR nightmare. It was a public relations nightmare for them, And
why is the Navy kind of taken over? What? Because even back, I remember reading documents back in the 80s, and it was always the Navy.
Well, the Navy, the UFOs videos that were the videos shot from the cockpit, the gun cameras, I believe.
Yep.
Were Navy planes. I really can't speak to how the Navy ended up with this. Maybe just because the Air Force still won't touch it. But somehow they did. John Greenwald's Jr. is probably a better man to speak to about that, or Kevin Randall. But here they are. But here's something that just occurred to me literally a couple of days ago. At the congressional hearings, Scott Bray, a spokesman for the Navy, he's the director of the Navy, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the main thing he emphasized during the congressional hearings was that they're destigmatizing reporting. And they're setting up a protocol for reporting. So if the Department of Defense has in the past, historically, if there was a stigma on reporting and no protocol for reporting, how can the government, the Department of Defense, possibly have more information on this subject and more data on this subject than private researchers who are encouraging reporting and going and talking to people and taking their testimonies? And not only that, it's common for the FAA and the military, etc. They have the numbers for the National UFO Reporting Center and MUFON, and they say, "Hey, take this, send it to those guys if you want to report this."
I always took that as they already knew, so that's why they didn't want it reported, because they already knew everything that was going on.
I don't see that at all. They seem as confused as everybody else, as
No,
far
I
as I can see.
realize, but I always
Bob
take
Ray didn't even know what Malmstrom was.
well, I know, but if you really think about it, if you're refusing new information, you
Mhm.
must know something. I mean, they've had satellites since the 60s that could count the threads on a stove bolt.
Ah.
So, no doubt they knew more than they were obviously letting on for a lot of years. And what were they so afraid of that people couldn't even report things? Just it never made sense to me.
I I think it's just because it's a weird thing. Uh, are you familiar with the idea of trickster?
Not maybe not.
It's a trickster is an archetype. Um,
Yep.
yeah. Okay.
You like a gin?
No, no.
No,
It's
what are you talking about?
kind of it's the idea that there's this thing that messes with us.
Right.
Uh, a lot of people. You're familiar with Skinwalker Ranch.
Yes, of course. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
so uh, all the weird stuff that happened uh, reportedly happened at Skinwalker Ranch, is written about in the first book with Colm Kelleher and George Knapp, I
Yep.
believe.
Yep.
Yeah, well, basically all that kind of fits a trickster archetype, something that is messing with them.
Right.
And one person who wrote about it pretty well was George Hansen. And a big thing he talked about was that trickster exists on the fringes of society. And there's this main pulse, this main beat of society, where we're getting on with life. We're dealing with commerce, going to work, getting up, going to work and doing your job and running the government and, protecting the country as a military organization. And all this weird stuff just gets in the way. It's a distraction. I mean, you're dealing with terrorism, and all of a sudden, you've got this weird thing you can't explain. That's going to be nothing. That's not going to help.
So,
So,
Charles, is your take that the government just didn't want to deal with it? They
yeah,
just want to dump it under the rug and ignore it, and these people clearly are
and
hallucinating.
you hear that time after time. You hear that during the whole Tic Tac incident. Some guy they basically say that some guys were told to sign a non-disclosure agreement, some people weren't, and it seemed they all described that there was no real protocol for dealing with it, and a lot of guys were just don't talk about this. It's going to cause nothing but trouble. We got a job to do here. We don't want to go from being involved in a training exercise to having to talk about this weird light we saw, which we have no idea what it was. That's my opinion. So, but I think that's a good way to look at it. But anyway,
So do you think there's going to be a ton of new reports because they're allowing reports to come in and they have a protocol? Do you think there's going to be a flood of new reports?
that'll be interesting. But as to whether we can see them, that's
Be the same.
as to whether we can see them or not, we're probably not going to be able to see them. It does, I don't know that transparency is going to be a whole nother issue.
Yeah, I do wonder. I really wonder if we're going to end up with a whole flood of military and pilot reports. Has the FAA loosened up standards? Or are they still pretty much ignoring pilot reports?
I don't think so. I can't really talk to that, but I mean, historically they haven't. Historically there's been no protocol for that at all.
Yeah.
And then the FAA is another one who they just say, if you want to report it, here's the National UFO Reporting Center, which is a private organization. So yeah, I don't know if the FAA is dealing with it, but NASA, that just happened. That's interesting. I think you mentioned that you wanted to discuss that, right?
Yeah, let's talk about that, because obviously they filmed more UFOs than you could count, because I've seen all of the NASA footage. There's that one guy even in Toronto that intercepted it from his little public cable station where he had the satellite dishes, like the Tether incident, and all these UFOs that have been filmed that he sucked the footage away. Come on, you just kind of wonder. NASA debunks it to the public, but are they debunking it amongst themselves? And have they been secretly already studying, UFOs? And now they announce, oh, I guess we're going to start to study UFOs. It's just something wrong here.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that we spent $22 million of our tax dollars on the Skinwalker Ranch investigation. That's where that money went. It didn't go to study UFOs. It went to Skinwalker Ranch. That's where that money was spent.
Mm-hmm.
And their conclusion was that the phenomenon does not lend itself to scientific research. So here's NASA saying that we're going to spend tax dollars on scientific research.
Yeah, it's like, and what can they really do other than film them?
Yeah,
out in space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're not going to shoot at them, I wouldn't think. And
well, they have been shot at historically.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt they have. But
the Iran incident, right? 1976, yeah. Right? Yeah, I mean, their guns were locked, but people have actually people on the ground have shot at them too, which is probably not the best idea.
No, you wouldn't think it would be. And then there's the footage that from NASA that shows what looks like some type of a weapon being fired at orbs or these lit objects, and they just they take off after they're fired upon. So you just wonder, what could they do? What do you think they could do to research UFOs, NASA?
I don't know. I'd rather they not.
You'd rather they not research them?
I mean, let them. I have fun as far as I'm concerned, fellas. It's interesting that what I found in looking through the history of it, in terms of government organizations, is that when you've got it depends on who's running things. So if the person running things is interested in the subject and open-minded about it, they'll people within that government organization will look into it. Like the Air Force, there were times when Project Blue Book was very open-minded and took down, got wrote down good files with witness testimony, and basically put out a good report, and would leave it open-ended if they didn't know what it was. Would describe it as unidentified, instead of this is
instead of debunking it.
Yeah, instead of calling it ball lightning, which is hysterical because ball lightning still hasn't been proven scientifically.
Yeah, swamp gas and ball lightning.
Mm-hmm. So, the history of the Project Blue Book investigation, it depended who was in charge.
Interesting. So what do you think about it? NASA? Why? What do you think motivated NASA to announce they're going to suddenly start, investigating UFOs?
Looks like Charles. Looks like you muted yourself.
You hit your mute button there on your computer.
Looks like you're back. Do you want to say something? Oh,
nope, he's not. Right below at the very bottom, there's a mute button.
So he's unmuted. He was when he was talking. Maybe a wire got pulled.
No, I think the software, Charles. Scroll right down to the bottom of this.
I see it. It's unmuted. It's not the software.
Oh, okay.
I see it, Charles. You're unmuted, so it's got to be something with your hardware.
I got it. Here you are. Right?
There we go. You're back.
Yeah,
You're back.
somehow,
I'm good.
somehow it switched me to another mic.
All right. So my question was,
so the guy in running
motivated?
NASA right now is open-minded about the subject.
Oh,
So that's why they're looking into it.
I got you. So that's just it. Just one guy can make a decision for a multi-billion-dollar expense for the U.S. to start to study UFOs.
Yeah. Well, it depends. Who's running things. Gerald Ford was a House Minority Speaker when you had all this stuff going on in Michigan.
Right.
There was a flap in Michigan, and that's where the whole swamp gas thing came out of. J. Allen Hynek was sent down there to investigate. There were a bunch of sightings. The particular one, Frank Manor, saw this craft in a swamp and described it as this big thing with kind of this like weird grid-like pattern on it, lit up. And he went down and to check it out with I think his sons-in-law, and thing took off. Police claimed to have seen it as well. And then there was also a sighting by a bunch of co-eds in a college nearby. And so this made the papers all over the place and caused I think it was Dexter, Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. But it made, it caused a lot of ruckus in the press. And so the Air Force was obligated to send J. Allen Hynek down, who was a scientific consultant for the Project Blue Book. He was a scientific consultant. Before it was Blue Book, it was called Project Sign for about a year and Project Grudge for about a year after that. And then in 1952, it turned into Project Blue Book. And Hynek was there for the entire time. So Hynek was sent down in 1966 to look into this. And I think his jaw was broken at the time. I read that his jaw was wired shut for a period. I don't think it was during the press conference. It doesn't seem to be. But he had trouble even getting through the witnesses because the crush from the press was so bad. And he called up the guy running Project Blue Book at the time was Hector Quintanilla. Hector Quintanilla was really anti-saucer. So Hector Quintanilla, it was basically, well, do you have any, what do you think? What do you think this could be? And Hynek was moved to say, well, I think it could be swamp gas, or he actually said marsh gas in the press conference, at least the televised version, that the video version that I saw. He might have said it at other times. He might have called it swamp gas at other times. But during the video that you can see on YouTube, Hynek calls it marsh gas. And he, according to Quintanilla wrote an unpublished work describing this. And Quintanilla says that Hynek spoke with his not comrades, peers, and they thought marsh gas might be a good explanation. Hynek offered other solutions. He said the moon, Venus, and marsh gas. Basically his idea was that marsh gas was ignite in one area, go out, ignite in another area, go out, and it would look like movement. And he threw this out at the press conference. The press ran away and said swamp gas is the explanation the Air Force has given for what everybody has claimed to have seen.
So, Charles, from what you're saying, is it like they were struggling to come up with an explanation that the general public would buy? Were they?
Well, I think Hynek was I think Hynek was probably in earnest.
Like he
But
was trying to think of like what's a logical explanation.
well, the other thing too is that I'm sorry, Quintanilla wrote that the press conference was unprecedented. They hadn't done that before, and Hynek asked permission to have this press conference, and it turned into a PR disaster. So Gerald Ford, this is getting back to what we were talking about, people, open-minded people with power. Gerald Ford was a representative of Michigan at the time and the House Minority Speaker. So Gerald Ford wrote a letter to at least the House Armed Services Committee and suggested they hold a hearing. So they did. And they dragged Hynek and Quintanilla and the head of the Air Force down to Washington to testify before Congress and explain themselves, explain how they're investigating. And so, this is an example of somebody in power with an open mind says, well, you know what? I think these people saw something, and I think you did a very bad job of investigating.
But I've heard stories, Charles. I've heard stories that Hynek was pressured to start debunking.
I think Hynek, this shows up in the book as well. A guy named Dr. James McDonald, who was an atmospheric physicist, was the first really big, prominent scientist to come forward in the press. Not APRO actually did have some bona fide scientists on their board and as consultants who would contribute to the APRO bulletin, but they weren't so much out talking to the mainstream press. Not so much. Some of them did though. But McDonald was high profile. So he really got started around 1967, I believe, and investigating. And he got some money. He had a government contract, something to do with using lasers to investigate atmosphere and atmospheric anomalies. And as UFOs can be considered atmospheric anomalies, the person who he was getting his money from, McDonald was hoping to get involved with the Air Force was moved to start a scientific UFO study or fund a scientific UFO study by an independent organization, a university, hopefully. And McDonald was hoping to be a part of that. That fell through because the University of Colorado got the contract. And it was thought that, well, if you had McDonald doing it, it wouldn't look so good, if you had another guy working on it while the University of Colorado was working on it. It might undermine the Air Force's work. So this guy got McDonald money to investigate UFOs based on him looking at atmospheric anomalies. And he got access. He got the opportunity to go down to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and look at the Project Blue Book files. And when he looked at the files, he was appalled. He was looking at these, swamp gas, ball lightning, temperature inversion, all these explanations. And he would look at the report and then look at the explanations, say, these don't match, and there's no scientific basis for coming up with this conclusion. And then he would see that Hynek signed off on it. And so he made arrangements to meet with Hynek. Hynek had no idea what was coming. And so he went and met with him at Northwestern University. Hynek was working with Jacques Vallée at the time. Hynek had gotten Jacques Vallée a job as a computer systems program. He alerted Valet to the job, and Valet got the job, and he got the job to work closely with Hynek because he was very impressed with Hynek. So Valet was present and writes about the Hynek's first meeting with first lunch with James McDonald. And he wrote about it in Forbidden Science, the journals covering the years, I think up to 1969. But anyway, it's the journal covering this period. And he describes McDonald laying in to Hynek. How could you write off, how could you sign your name to these? Why didn't you speak up? And Hynek defended himself, basically saying, well, if I speak up, they boot me. I'm no longer an insider. So Hynek,
So he was afraid of losing his position of authority, maybe even his job.
It wasn't a job. He was, it was extra money for him. He was, the head of the astronomy department, I believe, at Northwestern University. Hynek was a prominent scientist. But
I think he was worried about his reputation being destroyed.
It was more about just losing access, So maybe, a bit of the devil's bargain, but Hynek wasn't a believer either. He kind of, Hynek was looking for rational explanations for this stuff for most of his career. And the APRO and NICAP, they treat him as the devil sometimes, He actually started turning around after the Socorro incident in 1964. He was so impressed by that he, April 24th, 1960, was it 65? 64. I should know that, but I don't. But yeah, he started turning around after the Socorro incident. Lonnie Zamora saw what he thought was a large white oval rise up out of an arroyo and saw two figures that he described as being dressed in white coveralls. And he got in contact with fellow police officers, and they went down to investigate and saw four rectangular impressions in charred bushes. So Hynek went down to investigate that case, and he was so impressed, he went down on his own time. He went first on the Air Force dime and then went on his own time twice after that.
Wasn't this a turning point?
Yeah, that's what a lot of people feel, is that this was a turning point for Hynek when he was starting to say, there might be something
to it. Yeah.
Right. So he meets McDonald as he's just beginning this journey. And McDonald laid into him and said, you need to come forward. And to his credit, he did. He started not long after getting yelled at by McDonald. He started coming forward in the press, basically saying, we need to look at this with an open mind. And we should.
I've got an interesting story on the Zamora thing that nobody knows. I was good friends with Stan Friedman. We hung out a lot together.
Cool.
I traveled with him quite a bit. But he was in Minneapolis. He was staying at up here. And I got him a radio interview at a local radio station. This is a weird story. And there's a guy interviewing him who I knew this DJ because he had done voiceover work for me for years. So he's interviewing Stanton, and Stanton brings up the Ronnie Zamora case, that it was the anniversary. So he just brought that up. And all of a sudden, Tim Russell, the guy that's interviewing Stan, says, I was there seconds after the craft took off. And Stan's going, what? You were a witness to this? He goes, yeah. He goes, me, my sister, and my parents were on vacation in New Mexico. And the craft had just lifted up, and we pulled up in our station wagon to see what all the commotion was going on and why we saw fire and all this stuff. Pulled up and talked to Ronnie. He was still freaked out and shaking.
Mhm.
while they were on vacation.
Wow, I hadn't heard that.
No,
That's
nobody
kind
had.
of important. Well, how come this guy hasn't come forward? Because that's rather important.
He
That's what
did.
they've been looking for.
Live on
The
the radio.
biggest,
Live on
yeah.
the radio. So
Wow.
the fact was, what were the chances that Stan was in the studio, brings up this case that it was the anniversary? Otherwise, it would have never been brought up. And then suddenly, this guy said, "I was there." He said they
Wow.
saw this stuff burning still
Mhm.
when they had pulled up. So what an amazing coincidence!
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah,
Yes.
actually, I was in when I was in New Mexico. I was staying in Magdalena, New Mexico, which is where Lonnie Zamora was born and raised. And I spoke with people who knew him.
Yeah.
And one great quote that I hadn't heard. He was asked by an interviewer, Lonnie, were you in a state of confusion? He says, "No, sir. I was in the state of New Mexico."
That sums up what I've read about Lonnie.
Yeah, but he was a straight up guy, according to everybody. I mean, this was mostly well, a, a, historically a one witness account, but now you say there was other witness, and
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't think Stan did anything with that. Obviously,
that's weird that that's fallen through the cracks
it
because
has. Well,
that's huge.
it is
That's
huge.
what they were looking for because there was somebody who pulled up to there's a story that somebody pulled up to a gas station and asked, commented on the low flying vehicles in the area.
Right.
And the gas station attendant testified to this, but they could never track down those witnesses. So
Well,
that was,
this was different. This was a witness that pulled up right next to the squad car.
wow. Well, I wish that person would come
I'm
forward
gonna
again because
give them
that's
the
significant.
information. We have the contact information
Mhm.
for Tim, and
Wow.
I thought it was an amazing backup.
Kevin Randall just should get in touch with Kevin Randall. He just
We had Kevin on. It seems like
yeah.
every time I've told that, I haven't told it much, but nobody
Did you-
seems interested.
Well, I am.
We'll have to get you. I'll have to get you hooked up with Tim.
Yeah, that would be very cool.
Yeah, but he used to do voiceover work for me, and he's got an amazing voice. But it was the whole fact that this was a coincidence
Yeah.
beyond coincidences. That I just thought the chances of that happening were a billion to one.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Just a crazy story. Okay, so let's skirt on here.
Tim had a
Is there-
question.
Go ahead, Alex.
He just asked, did the local law enforcement agencies keep reports on these accounts?
You can find law enforcement agency reports throughout the literature. There are documents available online all over the place. And they're also included in the QFOS files and the NICAP files. And yeah, that they're really cool to look at. When I was in David Marler's archives, there was just these little slips of paper that were police reports on. I forget what this. I think it was Red Bluffs, California sighting by police officers. But yeah, that they're all over the place. They're actually some of my favorites. There's a classic one, Herbert Shermer from Nebraska. He saw a UFO and went closer to it. His car was pulled towards it. Creature approached him and took him aboard and did some stuff with him. I think injected him at one point with something. And the famous quote from that episode was, "We want you to believe in us, but not too much." Excuse me, but not too much. But when he got back to the station, police report. First thing he wrote in his police blotter was, "Saw a UFO tonight. Believe it or not." So that's a very famous one. He actually turns up in the Condon report, the University of Colorado study that the Air Force was moved to fund. His case is in there, and he was actually one of the very early hypnotic regression people. He was one of the first people to be hypnotically regressed by Dr. Leo Sprinkle as part of that. And that's where a lot of this story came out of. But there are police reports all over the place. There are FBI files. They're out there.
So, what are your thoughts on the Cash Landrum case, which to me is still a very huge landmark?
That's just so strange. That is so strange. Yeah, I mean, because they suffered physical effects.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of cases out there, and I wrote one of my chapters is called Overt Contact, and it started happening that people were okay. This is a great case. I'm dropping David's name a lot, but David Marler investigated this case recently. He tracked down the witness. It was a young boy named Charles in 1964, right around the Socorro incident, which is kind of why it fell through the cracks. But this 9-year-old boy was playing outside his grandmother's laundromat. He might have been 8, I think, playing outside his grandmother's laundromat. And he sees this black top about 5 feet tall. It's shaped like a black top across the street. And he gets this feeling that it sees him. He moves to the left, it moves to the left. He moves to the right, it moves to the right. He moves again, it moves again. And then it comes straight towards him, and he ducks as if it's going to hit him, and it suddenly hovers right over him. And then it shoots a flame down over him. His hair catches on fire, and he runs to the laundromat. His grandmother testified to this, and she had to put out his hair, and grandfather comes driving in, and they get him to the hospital. He spent 2 weeks in the hospital, another 4 weeks recovering. His face was swollen so bad that they said his nose disappeared. He was itching terribly, but other than that, he said he felt no pain. He lost a little hearing, I think it was in his left ear, and had to wear glasses afterwards. So that's one of them. There are other reports all over the place. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it reminds me of the Val Johnson case in some ways.
Right, exactly. So
he was a police officer who had welding burns on his eyes.
Oh, that's common. That is super common because what I do is look at all these old cases every week. I'll bring one up and look at the files, but that's super common. John Keel actually brought that up in the Mothman prophecies. A lot of the people who saw Mothman claim to have seen Mothman would have. I'm actually a welder, so we call it welder burn. It's also called Klieg conjunctivitis.
Yeah.
And it's where your eyes are literally sunburned, and it's painful as hell because I've had it. Your eyes get all red, and the tears irritate them, which is what makes it absolutely terrible. But that's a super common report. And I think the investigators throughout history have dropped the ball on this because this is trace evidence. There are people that not only have that, there are other physical effects. A young kid named Gregory Wells, I think he was 11 years old. He got zapped by a UFO and had a burn on his arm, and was taken to the hospital. So these are all these medical records, and all these cases are so long ago. The medical records are gone, and I can't find any of these medical records in the literature and any of the files.
Yeah.
And I think, that's a shame. And I think that's something, investigators could do today.
Well, isn't the Cash Landrum case, that one is documented pretty well medically because they sued the government.
Yes, they did. And they lost.
Yeah, of course they did.
Mm-hmm.
Man, so back to the Val Johnson case. I actually met he was a friend of mine. I had no idea he was a Blue Book.
Oh, very cool.
But he investigated. He was the original Blue Book investigator for the Val Johnson case. He was the first guy on site. And here's one of his weird stories that, once again, has never made it in any files. He said the glass from the taillight was stacked up.
Ooh,
Really
that's cool.
yeah. And so not only was it stacked, it was in a triangle. And when he
Wow.
got there, when Alan got there, because he lives up in that area, which is why he was called,
Mhm.
there were still some of the there was some burn damage also on some of the plants. And so he told me the story of going to Chicago to turn this case in. He had to go personally.
Mhm.
He met with apparently it's one of the top brass in charge of Blue Book, and the guy literally walked out of the meeting after Alan submitted his case, this Blue Book file, and he said, "I've seen enough of this crap," and walked out of the room.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, like his mind was blown, or
I don't know. Alan didn't know what to think because the guy just
yeah.
walked out. Didn't even
Because
change.
the one, if I remember correctly, too, his antenna was like bent like that.
At a 90, a spring-loaded
Yeah,
antenna.
like something just nailed it and bent it. Yeah,
The
and that
first,
that car is still on display, right?
yeah, it is.
Mhm.
It's up in it's in basically a barn. They've got a little museum set up there,
Mhm.
and there was a number of things I wanted to do with the car because I've got a whole bunch of tests I'd still like to do on it.
Right.
In that documentary, that was back when I was working for the History Channel. That documentary got taken away from me and given to another producer.
Oh,
And I saw the thing, and they didn't do any of the cool forensics that I had planned on doing with the car.
mhm.
But that's an amazing case because he had damage to the windshield, damage to the hood, damage to, I think, some of the gauges and the clocks had even all stopped.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
damage to the taillight, which is weird. And when Alan told me this glass was stacked up really high, and I went, "Ooh, that's a creepy
Yeah, really.
detail."
Yeah, there's so many I love the police reports. They're great. I
Yeah,
mean, and because they're the guys that are the front. They're more front line, I think, than anybody else in this mystery.
yeah,
You know, the people call them constantly. You know, I see something weird. I'm Trumbull County, Ohio. I mean, that's amazing. And for those who don't know, there are investigator. I forget the investigator's name, but called up the police, heard about this case where all these police in Trumbull County, Ohio, were chasing a group of UFOs. I think there were three of them,
yeah.
as many as three of them. That and they're all talking on the radio mainly through police dispatch.
Aren't some of those recordings still available?
That's the thing. The investigator got the recordings. They handed them right over.
Yeah.
That's what's really cool about the police is they're like, yeah, sure, here. They're not answering, to any. There's kind of a jurisdictional jealousy. This is my home turf. Yes,
Yeah.
this happened. Here's the tapes. That's my take on it.
Right.
But they turned it right over, and yeah, you can find those on YouTube. It's amazing. Just listening to this, you hear the first calls from the. I think it's right from 911. It's the 911 desk and dispatcher.
Right.
And you hear the calls from the citizens, and then you hear the interaction between the police. It's an amazing tape. I mean, it just tells a great story.
What are some of the other cases that you can remember that involve the police? Is there anything, or
I
involve
read
really good trace evidence?
really good trace evidence with the police.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I know of an odd one in Italy. You ever heard of the Zamfretta case?
No.
It's more of a security guard, and then the Carabinieri, which are the national police. This security guard, um, this is his name is Piero Fortunato Zamfretta, and this happened, I think, from 78 into 79, and he he saw some lights. He was with a private security company, and they patrolled a certain area, a neighborhood, and he saw some lights on this estate. Went to investigate, and then had an encounter with a 3-meter tall creature, big yellow eyes, scary looking creature. And then he ended up face down on the grass, and this craft apparently took off. Well, the craft left trace evidence, big horseshoe shaped impression in the grass. And his fellow security guards from the company, Val Biziano, I believe is the name of the company. You know, they, I think he made a distress call on his CB, and they went out to find him. They found him face down on the grass. The weird thing was that it was cold, but his head was hot. And so he had just these repeated encounters, but there was trace evidence in the form of these horseshoe impressions in more than one spot and huge footprints that kind of matched his description of the creatures. That's a great, fun case. There's a book about it. I think it's called the Zamfretta case, written by Reno Di Stefano. So that's one of the more ridiculous ones. But, the Lonnie Zamora Socorro case, that's like the classic one with trace evidence. For not only were there 4 rectangular impressions in the ground, they also saw these 4 holes,
Right.
2 sets of 2 that they interpreted as a ladder being put down and then repositioned.
Wasn't there sand turned into glass too from high heat?
I didn't see that in any of the reports I read.
It was part of that case, and I saw that on a UFO hunter show, and they were trying to melt the local sand to see if it would melt, like this glass. There's a name for the glass. I can't think of it, but it's like glass that would be formed during a nuclear blast.
Well, there's trinitite.
Trinitite. That's what they were.
Yeah.
Apparently, there was trinitite found at the site. So you can imagine that.
That's odd. Yeah, I've been to Trinity actually. They open up, I think, once or twice a year. But anyway,
I don't think I'd want to go there.
Yeah,
glowing. It's still. I mean, those areas are still radioactive, aren't they?
a bit, yeah.
A bit. Yeah, it's like getting 100 X-rays, George.
Yeah, I mean, all the stuff they blew up in Nevada. I mean, but
God, it's to think about them doing that now, doing nuclear tests near a city. It's just insane.
Yeah, actually, James McDonald, a big reason he didn't get any money from the Air Force to help with their scientific study was because he fought like hell because they were putting missile silos upwind from major cities. He says you probably shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
And there were especially around Tucson, I think his hometown, yeah. So he made a big stink about them doing that, and the result was that they put them downwind from major cities after that. So
yeah. So what are your thoughts on guys like Bud Hopkins and some of the alien abduction researchers that, to me, I think is kind of coming to an end because the whole old guard is kind of disappearing. We have Jacobs is still around, but he's getting up there.
Well,
who's going to take over
what's Betty Hill's niece, Kathleen Martin.
Kathleen Martin, yeah.
Kathleen Martin is still very active in that. I think she just wrote a book not too long ago, What to Do If You've Been Abducted, which, hey, it's good to have a guidebook for something like that. I mean, people are still saying they experience this.
But are you aware of any of the younger generation taking over that research? I'm not.
Picking up the mantle.
Who's going to pick it up?
George.
I'm hearing it. I'm hearing more and more just on the podcast circuit. From conversations I'm hearing that, it's people are still dealing with it and still offering support to people who, come forward with these experiences. So, I don't think you're gonna. I think they're not being as high profile about it anymore, or trying to stick a narrative on it so much. I don't know if you've seen Alan Stevelman's "Witness of Another World."
No.
See, that's another one where this young boy in I think it's Argentina, son of a gaucho. I think age 12, he saw a UFO, went on board, met a creature, and he was traumatized by the experience. Essentially, he said that at the time he just took it as kind of matter of fact, but afterwards he was isolated from his community, from his family, from his friends, and his community. He ended up living alone on a farm. And Alan Stevelman was looking into the mystery and of UFOs in general, and came upon this guy, talked to him, befriended him, and worked with him to come to grips with this. And his grandfather was a key figure in his life, and his grandfather had genetic ties, family ties to an indigenous group in Paraguay, I believe. And he went down to Paraguay, talked to the shaman down there, and they said, well, he had an experience with, he had a life-changing experience with something that fits within our belief system. And he brought this guy, Juan Perez, down to Paraguay. And when he spoke with the shaman and was able to put this experience in that kind of context, it made sense to him. It settled him. He was able to accept it. So that's one way people are looking at this, is putting it into that kind of context. As you're not necessarily dealing with creatures from Zeta Reticuli. You're having an experience meant for you for your spiritual development. I'm not saying that's valid or invalid. If it helps, I think it's wonderful. I think if the Zeta Reticuli thing helps, that's wonderful too. I mean, some people claim negative experiences, some people claim positive experiences, but it hasn't gone away, is the long and short of it. It hasn't gone away. It's not as high profile, but it's, people are still coming forward.
It's never going to go away, but who is picking up? We don't have any colleges studying this. We don't have any professors anymore.
Yeah, you're not going to get a John Mack again. Yeah, John
Mack's gone. Like I said, he's done. I think his work has been amazing, but it's coming to a close. I doubt he's seeing new abduction patients anymore. So I just wonder, is the younger generation going to even pick it up, or is it just going to all just be accepted and we don't even worry about it? Why even research it? I don't know. I just wonder where the future is going with some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
I do wonder about that. So what are your thoughts on all of the footage? Do you pay any attention to the footage on YouTube? Do you watch it? Do you just ignore it because it's possibly all fake? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I did way back when, but no, I don't bother with it anymore.
I don't bother. Yeah.
No, I mean, I look at a MUFON journal. Occasionally has some interesting pictures. They're still out there. I find it interesting. I don't think.
It seems like you have a problem with it.
Well, no, there are some pictures that Wendell Stevens. Okay, he had reportedly the biggest collection of UFO pictures
from a gun camera
ever, just from everybody. Okay, he used to trade.
Okay.
Okay, so
That's
he,
an archive.
but notoriously he was a champion of Billy Meyer. So that kind of put his rep in the dumper for a bit.
Yeah.
But he did have a huge collection of UFO photos. Unfortunately, there's not easy access to that. I don't think there are any extant
But I'm not
publications.
referring to things like the McMinnville and photos that have been looked at really hard. I'm
Mhm.
talking about new footage. I'm talking about today.
Yeah.
Pay any attention to all the new footage that's coming out.
Well, people keep bringing stuff up, and and it turns out to be a Batman balloon. I mean, it just gets kind of tiring. So if somebody brings it up and says, here's something really interesting, and we can't figure it out, yeah, I'll look at it, but I don't troll for it.
Yeah. Okay.
And like I said, I look at it as more as an historian. So I'm not an active investigator. I'm an historian. So somebody else investigates, I'll read your file and then, write a book about it in 20 years.
Gotcha.
So
You're
I'm
interested.
just trying to figure out how you think, Charles. There's so many of these people do these interviews and
well,
podcasts.
I'm more like I believe in everything and nothing. That's a quote from Gray Barker.
I like to try to get to know people. Like, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
You don't want to just know what you know. I want to know what you're thinking.
Yeah. Right
So
on.
are you more interested in the search for truth and less about?
No, I'm
No, it's not.
I'm interested in experience. It's like how I live my life. I just live my life. I enjoy it. And I have fun with it.
Yeah, Alex, your mic is not working. I don't know what your deal is.
Yeah. So yeah, I just I'm
just
here to enjoy life, not figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think the way you live is more important than why you live. So. Yeah, but you want to know how I think, and I think that's pretty much how I look at the UFO issue.
Yeah.
It's fun, it's interesting. I might think differently if I had an experience myself,
Right.
as you have, for instance. And I'm sure that causes you to look at it very differently. You're an experiencer, and when people talk about disclosure, well, people who've already had the experience don't need this disclosure. For some reason, some people need a government stamp of approval on it, which I just find ridiculous. I look at this as a people's thing. This is folklore. This is ours as people. And I'm an old punk rocker. If you really want to know where I come from, so it's not only don't trust the government. As a youngster, F the government. This is ours. Is the way I look at the UFO thing. I don't need a corporate record company to tell me what music to listen to. I'll listen to the records made by my friends in their basement recording studio. So don't need the government to tell me, what they have figured out in their investigations. I'd rather listen to, my fellow investigator, I'm not an investigator, but the boots on the ground investigators who are out there doing this.
So you're dismissive of the government. You're more interested in what people have to say, the everyday people.
The witnesses. I think the witness accounts are.
So would you say you don't trust the government? Like, is that it's almost dismissive of just like, I mean,
I like to I like to look at the government now in my ripe old age as according to our Constitution, they're us. We are them. And I'd like to think that everybody's doing the best job they can herding cats. And it keeps me from getting upset, quite frankly. And I basically ignore what goes on as much as possible. If they're doing their job right, I shouldn't have to pay attention
Right.
except on voting day. You know,
Well,
I mean, maybe that's terribly irresponsible of me,
Well,
but
what investigator do you think has done the most throughout history? Who's brought the most information to light? Is it somebody currently now, or is it somebody from the past?
I think it's a culmination. 75 years. We've got a huge amount of literature. It's like, who's the best scientist? Science is built, you know,
Well, do you have one favorite or somebody you're
people
fascinated?
standing on people, standing on people, standing on people. It's a culmination of the effort.
Who do you want a training card of, Charles? You get one. One.
Trading card. Well, I mean, I'm fond of John Keel, but I don't
There we
think
go.
he was super responsible. You know, Keel, a lot of times you have to take him with a grain of salt. I think he opened people's minds to a lot of possibilities more than any other investigation. A Gator and Jacques Vallée, you know, came um, came around to his ideas a little later than he did. So okay, my if you want a trading card, it's John Keel.
Yes, it's John.
How about that? Very good.
Interesting. I always thought that Stanton did an amazing job with the public. You know, when he would speak, he was like in every documentary growing up.
Yeah.
It's like there wasn't a documentary that Stan wasn't in, but he always did a good job stating a very concise reason why he thought UFOs were real.
Right on.
Yeah, and that's
Well, he called them flying saucers. That's what I love about Stan.
Yeah, he did. Did you ever get to meet Stan?
No.
Oh, you didn't.
Like I said, I've only been a contributor as opposed to a consumer for about 4 years.
Oh, cool. Yeah. What about some of the new stuff going on? I mean, do you follow like Lou Elizondo and some of the new stuff, or you're just waiting for that to all kind of take shape before you start reporting on it?
Well, I mean, all that TSSA stuff, you know, a good quote is that it sucked the air out of ufology. You've got this one minority controlling the narrative, and that was a drag. And you know, so he's getting hammered right now because of the book that came out by James Lukatsky, which essentially barely mentions him. But I don't want to get into that because that's just, you know, there's so much mudslinging going on with that right now, and he's getting hammered. And I think his heart was in the right place. I like to think that. So, you know, but yeah, I'm kind of waiting for that to all go away, so some better stuff can come out. You know, because a lot of interesting reports are not being looked at, are not being talked about.
Yeah. Do you have a way that people can get a hold of you and contact you if they want to write you?
I'm a regular blogger at podcastufo.com. Also, I do an audio version of the blog at on Martin Willis's UFO YouTube site. So Martin Willis YouTube podcast UFO, it'll probably show up. And you can buy the book at Amazon.com. The Flying Saucer Investigator is available in Kindle audiobook, hardcover, and softcover.
Alex, can you throw his book up? Do you have it handy?
Yeah, sure. Just give me a minute here.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah, let's throw it up here.
I can throw my copy up.
Yeah, if you've got one.
There you go.
Yeah, we want to see it.
Flying Saucer Investigators by Charles Lear.
Pull it back just a tiny bit. There you go. Perfect. Yeah, very cool. Very cool.
Super cool.
Well, thank you, Charles. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure hanging out with you guys.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Good chat.
Yep. Thanks much.
Right. Cheers. Have
Enjoy
a good night.
Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
So do you want to keep we could potentially go another half an hour, or do you want to wrap it up for
I think we'll just wrap it up. That was great.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks everyone for listening. It was a great show. Thanks again to Charles, and have a good night.
Yeah, everybody enjoy your summer here.